Alrighty, y'all, continuing on with our supply and demand, let's look back at consumer and producer surplus. So we've got our supply curve that goes up, right? As price goes up, businesses are willing to produce more. At let's say $6, they're only willing to produce 10. At $12, though, they're willing to supply about 70. Our demand curve does the opposite. At a high price, consumers are only willing to buy 10 units. At a lower price, though, at $10, they're willing to buy 50. As that price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. And then we've got our equilibrium price here at $10, our equilibrium quantity at $50, or at 50 units. The consumer surplus is looking at how much better off consumers are because of trade. So if we take a look at this, they're willing to pay up to $15 for this good. If they're able to get it for $10, then they're that much better off. So if we're looking at 4 here, calculating our consumer surplus at the equilibrium price, here again we're measuring half of the base times the height. Because we're measuring the size of this triangle, the distance between what they're willing to pay and what they're actually able to pay. So our height here would be $5, right? The distance between $15 and $10. The base is looking at these number of units. They're buying 50 units. All right, so that's base times height. The height is $5. The base is 50 units. Comes out to 250. And since we're measuring a triangle and not a square, we just divide it by 2. So then the size of our consumer surplus here is $125. So our consumer surplus is measuring how much better off consumers are because of the trade. Producer surplus is measuring the opposite, how much better off producers are. I'm just going to do it shorthand here. Producers are willing to accept $5 for this. If they're able to get it for $10, then they're that much better off, right? And we would do our calculations the same way, right? The height would be the $5, the base would be the 50 units. So that would be our producer surplus. But what 5 here is asking us is calculate the consumer surplus if the price was $12. So if the price was $12, well then the consumers would be worse off than they were before. They were able to get it for $10, now they're only able to get it for $12. But if we're taking a look at this, as the price of that good goes up from $10 to $12, our quantity demanded is going to go down. Before at $10 they were willing to buy 50, now at $12 they're only willing to buy 30. So if we're calculating our consumer surplus at $12, our height would be $3, 15 minus 12. Our base would be 30 units. At $12, we're only willing to buy 30 of this good. 3 times 30 is 90. And again, we're measuring a triangle and not a square, so we divide it by 2. So our consumer surplus there would be $45. And then the final part is asking calculate the dead weight loss if the market produced only 20 units. So if we're only producing 20 units here, all right, the market wants us to produce 50. That's where we're at equilibrium. This dead weight loss is the area of inefficiency that we're no longer producing, right? So we should be producing 50. We're only producing 20. If I'm calculating my dead weight loss here, sorry, it's crooked. I'm going to do my height, 13, 14. I'm going to call this $13 right here. And I'm going to call this $7 right here. So my height would be 13 minus 7, which is 6. Sorry if I get the math wrong. I'm not great at math. Y'all know that. The base is, we should be producing 50 units. We're only producing 20. So that's 30 units that we're not making, that we're inefficient. So we've got our height, the $6, 13 minus 7. And we've got our base, the 30 units that we're no longer producing. 30 times 6 is 180. And again, we're measuring a triangle. We'll divide it by 2. So that'd be $90 for our dead weight loss. So where we usually see this is any time that the government intervenes in our market, whether it's a price floor or a price ceiling, it creates these shortages. We're producing less than we should be. Now, let's take a look a little bit more at how we graph out those shortages and surpluses. All right, so one is asking, draw a shortage on graph one, label the price, quantity supplied, quantity demanded, and shade in the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and dead weight loss. We've already got price and quantity labeled. So I'll draw out my supply curve. I'll draw out my demand curve. So our equilibrium price would be right here. I'm going to call it PE. Our equilibrium quantity would be right here, QE. So it's asking us to draw a shortage. So if we're looking at a shortage, prices are generally going to be lower than equilibrium. So let's label this P1 right here. All right, so at P1, we've got our quantity supplied. And then we would go over and label our quantity demanded. So what we can see here is that because the price is lower than equilibrium, our quantity demanded, or how much we want to buy, is greater than our quantity supplied, how much we're making. And so in that case, we would have a shortage of this good. So it's asking us to label the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and the dead weight loss. All right, so right now, if we're looking at this, because the prices are lower than they should be, we're not going to produce this many. We're only going to supply this many. All right, so if we're looking at our consumer surplus, or our producer surplus, it would be this area right here, because it's the distance between the lowest they would accept and what they're actually willing to accept. All right, our consumer surplus would be this area right here, right? That we're willing to pay the higher price for it. We're happy that we can get it at this lower price. But the problem is that we're not going to be producing as much as we should be. That's where we get back to our issue of dead weight loss, right? Because the prices are lower, businesses are producing less, and so we're not producing at the optimal amount, dead weight loss. So we've got our producer surplus, producers are worse off. We've got our consumer surplus, consumers are better off. And then we've got our dead weight loss, the area that we're no longer producing. Now, if we're looking at 2, right, we'd still have dead weight loss, we'd still have issues. We've got our supply curve, we've got our demand curve, we've got our equilibrium price, we've got our equilibrium price. 2 is asking us to draw a surplus of a good, right? So if we're looking at this surplus, I'll label it P2 here. The price we'll see is higher than the equilibrium. This is great for producers, right? So at this higher price, the quantity demanded is going to be the one that's low now. Businesses or consumers don't want to buy a good at a lower price. So that'll be our QS, our quantity supplied. Quantity demanded. But at this higher price, businesses are willing to make more because they can make a bigger profit. So we've got our QS here, our quantity supplied. So what we see here is that we've got a surplus because our supply is greater than our demand. If we're measuring from low to high, our supply is greater than our demand. All right, but the problem is we can make as many as we want, but if it's at a higher price, consumers aren't going to buy them. So if we're looking at this chart here, now our consumers are worse off. They're willing to pay this price, but they're having to pay this price right here. They're paying more than they were. They're paying more than equilibrium. Our producer surplus would be this area right here, that they're willing to accept this, but they're able to sell it for this much. But again, we're not buying as many as we should because of this higher price, so this would be our dead weight loss here. And so if we're looking at 3, this is why we differentiate like a change in demand and a change in quantity demanded, right? That if the price of a good goes up, it doesn't change how much we like the good, it just changes the quantity that would be bought. So if we're looking at the second one, at this higher price, our demand hasn't changed. Our quantity demanded has changed though. We're gonna buy less than we were before. Before we were gonna buy at QE, now we're buying at QD. So a change in QD, we're looking at a change in price. A change in demand is looking at how much we like or want or need a product. All right, and then the final bit of this, if we're looking at our change in demand and supply, I'm just going to make this easy. We've got our demand curve, we've got our demand curve, we've got our supply curve, we've got our supply curve, and we'll add in our counterpoints too. So we've got supply, demands, got equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, price, quantity, All right, so let's look at the effect on price and quantity from each of these changes. So let's remember our acronym ERDL. Increase right, decrease left. If we're measuring our quantity from low to high, then the further to the right we go, the higher of a value we're looking at. The further to the left we go, the lower of a value we're looking at. So if our demand is decreasing, that means this demand curve is going to shift to the left. We're buying less at each price. In which case, if we're looking at our new equilibrium price, it would be lower than it was before. Our equilibrium quantity has gone down as well. If we're looking at an increase in demand, that means people are going to buy more goods at each price, which would lead to a higher price level. So equilibrium prices have gone up, and a higher quantity as well. Q2. So quantity is going up. For supply, if our supply is decreasing, that means we're producing less goods at each price. Supply drops, in which case the price of the good is going to go up, and the quantity of the good is going to go down. And then finally, if our supply increases, we're producing more of the good at each price, which drives down the prices and increases the quantity. If we're looking at this double shift rule, essentially what it's saying is if both the supply and the demand shift, one of them will be indeterminate. That means that maybe it went up a little bit, maybe it went down a little bit. We can't really determine whether it increased or decreased unless we have the specific numbers. So let's look at this one right here. We've got our supply, we've got our demand, we've got our equilibrium price, we've got our equilibrium quantity. All right, so draw an increase in demand. Demand is going up. An increase in demand and an increase in supply. So our supply increases as well. So we've got S2 right here. So now we've got our new equilibrium price and our new equilibrium quantity. So if we're looking at the quantity's definitely gone up, right? That when demand went up, we bought more. When supply went up, we made it easier to produce. Our quantity has definitely gone up. Our price would be indeterminate though. When demand went up, prices went up. When supply increased, it got cheaper to make it, prices went back down. So maybe it went up a little bit, maybe it went down a little bit. We can't really determine whether it changed and by how much. So that would mean that it's indeterminate. That doesn't mean it didn't move, we just can't really determine which way it moved.